Hey there, so glad you're here. This is Reddit Stories Podcast. Relax, you're safe here. Here's our first story. Karen demands my window seat for her toddler. I've been planning this trip for almost a year. I'm half Asian, born and raised in the US, and I'd always wanted to see more of where my mom grew up. The food, the language, the little cultural things that didn't quite make it across the ocean into our household. This was going to be my first time outside the country, my first solo trip, and the first time I'd taken more than a few days off work in forever. I budgeted everything down to the last dollar. When I booked my flights, I remember hesitating before selecting the window seats. It cost extra. Not a lot, but enough to make me pause. But I figured I'm flying over the Pacific for 16 hours, flying for a total of 21 hours. This is the one time I really want the view. I want to rest my head against the wall and watch the clouds roll over the ocean, see the sun come up over a side of the world I've never been to. So I paid the extra. For every leg of the trip, actually, because this mattered to me. I was flying out of LAX. It was already a long day, and by the time boarding started for the Trans-Pacific leg, I was exhausted. I found my boarding group and waited for my turn. The gate crew announced full capacity, asked people to check large carry-ons, and all the usual stuff. Nothing unusual. When I finally boarded, I walked down the aisle, scanning seat numbers. I found my row, middle of the aircraft, 3 seats across, and paused. There was a small child already sitting in my window seat. He looked about 3, maybe 4 years old, legs dangling over the edges of the seat, swinging his feet happily while he looked out the window. His mom was sitting beside him in the middle seat, already buckled in. I figured maybe she didn't realize it wasn't theirs. I checked the overhead bin, stowed my bag, and then gently mentioned to her that I was assigned the window seat. She smiled at first, very friendly, very warm, and said something like, "Oh, would you mind switching? He just got settled and really loves the window." I paused. I really did. It's hard not to feel like a villain when someone says that with a toddler smiling at you. But I had chosen that seat for a reason. I explained I had actually paid for the window, and this was my first big trip, and I'd really prefer to keep it. Her smile faltered, then returned, just a little tighter this time. She said something like, "Oh, he's already sitting there though, and it's such a long flight. Would you mind just letting him stay?" I glanced at the open aisle around us. The plane was still boarding. I asked what her original seat number was. She dodged the question and said again that her son was already in the seat and was very comfortable. I looked at the flight attendant a few rows down and debated waving her over, but I didn't want to escalate it. I just repeated as politely as I could that I really needed my seat. She let out a long, dramatic sigh and said something about not wanting to upset him before we even took off. Her voice stayed calm, but there was a new edge to it. She turned to her son and said, "Looks like this lady wants to sit there, honey. I guess you'll have to move." And of course, that's when the kid started crying. I wasn't surprised. He was little, maybe tired, probably just mirroring his mom's energy. But as soon as he started to fuss, she leaned in and quietly asked if I could really not be flexible for a child of all people. Now, people were starting to glance at us. The boarding line was backing up behind me. I felt my ears burning. I wasn't trying to make a scene, but I also wasn't about to back down after working overtime, skipping nights out, and budgeting like crazy to afford this whole trip. I said, "I'm really sorry. I paid extra for this seat. I really need the window." That was the moment her tone shifted. The warmth dropped completely. She raised her voice. Not a shout, just a little louder than necessary. She said, "Wow, all right. I hope you're happy making a child cry." The people in line behind me tried to look like they weren't listening. I saw one guy awkwardly step back and stare at the ceiling. Eventually, she unbuckled, scooped up her son, and shuffled him over to the middle seat with the kind of energy that made it clear I'd just ruined her day. I sat down. The kid was still crying a little, sniffling against her shoulder. She adjusted everything with a level of sighing that could have powered a wind farm. Once I settled in, she didn't speak to me again. But for the next several hours, she made it clear I was public enemy number 1. She bumped me with her elbow every time she reached for something. At one point, she asked the flight attendant for juice, then gave a small shake of her head when it arrived, and made a pointed comment about how some people just don't make things easier. At one point, she pulled out her phone and started texting someone with her screen angled just enough to make sure I knew I was being talked about. The kid eventually calmed down and fell asleep for a while, curled up against her shoulder. But it didn't last. Every couple of hours, he'd wake up groggy and crying, thrashing a bit until she could calm him down again. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to make rest impossible. 16 hours is a long time to be trapped in a tense row, and the broken sleep only made everything feel heavier. She kept shifting in her seat and sighing, just loud enough for me to hear, every time I adjusted or glanced out the window. After a while, I stopped even looking out, just to keep the peace. But I didn't let it ruin the moment. This was my first trip outside the country, my first step towards something I had dreamed about for years. I told myself I could get through anything for a few hours, and I did. A few hours before landing, she flagged down a flight attendant and quietly asked if there were any open rows she could move to. The attendant checked, nodded, and led her and her son to an empty pair of seats a few rows back. As she stood up, she gave me this tight little smile, like she had just scored the last word in a silent argument, and tossed her blanket over her shoulder like she was walking off a stage. No nod, no glance back. Just gathered their things and left, like she had finally risen above the situation. As soon as she left, the older man across the aisle leaned over and said, "You did nothing wrong. I saw how she talked to you. That was out of line." I nodded and thanked him. I don't think I said anything else. When the plane finally landed, I waited until nearly everyone had disembarked before grabbing my bag. The window didn't end up mattering as much as I thought. It was nighttime for most of the flight. But the principle did. I worked hard for this trip. I planned and saved and made choices with intention. I didn't think asking to sit in the seat I paid for made me the bad guy. And honestly, if she had just been kind about it, I might have offered to switch after a few hours, once I'd had my moment, once the kid had settled. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just wanted the seat that I'd paid for, at least for part of the flight. But that's not what happened. This was someone trying to take something because they thought they could. Someone saw a quiet girl traveling alone and assumed they could pressure me into giving up what I had earned. Not this time. Something really similar happened to me on a flight to Seoul. I was traveling alone too, and a mom asked me to move so she and her teenage son could sit together, even though he clearly didn't care. I politely said no, because I'd paid extra for that seat. She got cold real quick, didn't say anything rude outright, just made it clear that she thought I was being unreasonable. People really underestimate solo travelers. They think we're pushovers. Good on you for standing your ground. Hey Karen, what would you do if someone asked you to give up your window seat for their toddler?
I'd smile, sip my ginger ale, and say, "I paid for the clouds. You can have the aisle."
Even if the kid starts to cry?
Especially if the kid starts to cry. I would just cry louder. We'd make it a duet. The sky's the limit.
Have you ever noticed a pattern where it seems like people keep coming into your life who treat you in a way that you know in your heart is wrong? Sometimes all you have to do is speak your truth. Stop putting their peace above your own. Their emotions were never your burden to bear. And sometimes that lesson never has to repeat itself again. IKEA, where relationships go to die. I'm not the kind of person who seeks out drama, but if drama knocks over a stack of ceramic mugs 2 feet from me while I'm just trying to find a decent side table, I'm probably going to stick around long enough to see what happens next. This happened 3 Saturdays ago at IKEA. You know how it gets. Packed, echoey, toddlers in every direction, and couples locked in passive-aggressive battles over lamps. I was there alone, which was already a bad idea. IKEA is not really built for solo shoppers. Every room is staged like a happy domestic fantasy, and I was stuck wandering about like a rejected sim with no furniture budget, trying to figure out whether I actually needed a new coffee table or was just bored and craving meatballs. Anyway, I was in the living room section, meandering through the setups and eyeing this one coffee table I couldn't decide on, when I noticed a couple standing near a display couch. Early 30s, matching outfits, the whole Instagram couple vibe. They didn't seem angry, just having one of those low-voiced, slightly too calm discussions couples tend to have in home stores. Nothing dramatic yet, just the usual IKEA tension. He was holding a small coffee table in his arms, and she looked like she was trying very hard not to roll her eyes every 5 seconds. At first, I tuned it out. Not my monkeys, not my IKEA. But then the woman's voice rose, just enough to make the nearby toddler stop in his tracks and blink. She said something about how he always did this, how he said one thing and then chose something that said the opposite. That was when I realized this wasn't about a table. It was about everything else. Still, I kept moving, hoping I could loop around and sneak past them. But of course, the layout forced me to either backtrack through kitchen organizers or walk directly through their simmering argument. So I did what any normal person would do. I pulled out my phone and tried to walk by as fast and invisibly as possible. But as I moved past, she turned to me and asked, "Sorry, can I ask you something?" I froze. "Ma'am, please, I'm just here for a table." She turned toward me and smiled. Tight, too bright. She asked if I could give my opinion, just quickly, just as a stranger. And before I could think of an excuse, she gestured toward the table and said they were trying to decide whether it looked like something a grown man would pick out for a serious home. I looked at the table. It was tiny, kind of flimsy looking with those wheels that belong on dorm room furniture. The kind of thing you could tip over just by setting down a glass of water too hard. I think I gave her a slightly awkward shrug and, trying to make light of the whole situation, said something along the lines of, "Yeah, it kind of looks like something a college student would use for ramen, and regrets." And boom, that was it. She looked absolutely vindicated. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, just stared at me like I had personally canceled his Netflix account. He asked who I was and why I was weighing in, and I wanted nothing more than to melt into the floor and disappear through a trap door into the warehouse section. I mumbled an apology and tried to leave, but it was too late. The floodgates were open. She started talking, not loudly, but with that tight, trembling tone people get when they've been holding something in too long. Said she wasn't mad about the table. She was upset because she thought they were moving forward in life. That when he said he was ready, she thought that meant they were finally building something, not just buying another tiny table they'd probably leave behind during the next move. He kept trying to stay calm, said it wasn't that serious, that it was just furniture and could be replaced later. But that just made it worse. She started tearing up a little and said something about how she was tired of feeling like she was the only one with a plan. I should have left. I really should have. But I was frozen there, halfway behind a fake bookshelf display, pretending to look at a catalog like I wasn't hearing every word. By then, I was already way too invested, like I had to know how this was going to end. The worst part? They kept occasionally glancing at me like I was supposed to still be part of the conversation, like I was a guest star in the tragic final season of their relationship. At one point, she asked again, to no one in particular, if it was really that hard to show up for someone. And maybe she was asking him. Maybe she was asking me. Maybe she was asking the general vibe of IKEA. But in that moment, half the store went silent tuning in. She said she had given everything, that she had waited, compromised, even agreed to rent a place closer to his job, even though she hated the commute. And now here they were, arguing over a $50 table that couldn't even hold a real dinner plate. Eventually, she sat down on the display couch, wiped her face, and said she was done. Just done. She told him he could buy that table, take it home, and build his little solo life on it if that's what he wanted. Then she looked at me again, thanked me for my honest input, and walked off. Calmly, like she was just heading to the checkout. Left him standing there, still holding the box, looking like someone had unplugged him. He looked over at me, blinked, and said, "That escalated." I think I just nodded. What else could I do? I mumbled something about, "Good luck, man," and shuffled off to the nearest shortcut I could find. I didn't even pick up the table I came for, just wandered through the rug maze until I found the exit and beelined for the parking lot like I was fleeing a crime scene. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes afterward, just kind of laughing to myself and trying to process what I had just witnessed. Honestly, I still don't know what that was. A breakup? A turning point? Just another weird peak IKEA energy moment? Maybe all of the above. It did make me think about a few of my own past relationships, though, and how close we probably came to throwing hands over a dresser. I do know this. If you're ever wondering how serious a relationship is, don't look at the couple's Instagram posts. Watch how they pick out furniture. That tells you everything. Sometimes I still wonder if they made it. But if you ever spot a guy alone at IKEA clutching a $49 table like it holds the meaning of life, leave him be. He's going through it. Nothing like being voluntold into a couple's breakup mid-aisle. That's insane. But you handled that way better than I would have. I'd have panicked and recommended, I don't know, a table with hidden storage or something. IKEA is low-key a relationship test. If you make it out with matching flatware and no emotional scars, you're probably soulmates. Hey Karen, what would you do if someone dragged you into their breakup in the middle of an IKEA?
I'd charge a consultation fee and grab a cinnamon bun on the way out.
Even if it got emotional?
Especially if it got emotional. Drama drains electrolytes. I'd need the sugar.
And what if you had a boyfriend who picked out a wobbly table at IKEA?
Oh, I've lived that story before. He picked the table, I picked the exit.
So you just left?
Left him, the table, and emotional baggage in aisle 14. I upgraded. The new guy owns real furniture. And a very cozy library.
Am I the jerk for selling my late grandfather's watch, even though my cousin wanted it for sentimental reasons? My grandfather passed away a little over a year ago. We were close, but not in the typical, we spent every weekend together kind of way. He was quiet, thoughtful, always tinkering with things. I think I got that from him. We had an understanding. He didn't talk much, but when he did, I listened. He taught me how to change brake pads, how to read a manual, how to repair a leaking faucet without making it worse. He had passed me tools in the garage like it was some kind of sacred ritual. I didn't realize how much those Saturdays meant to me until he was gone. In his will, he left me one thing, his 1969 Omega Seamaster, the watch. He wore it daily until his arthritis made it impossible to wind. There was no house to split, no bank account to divvy up. Most of his savings probably went toward medical care. In the end, there were a few pieces of furniture, personal effects, some tools, and that watch. I wasn't the only one he was close with, though. My cousin Kyle, who's 30, was around too, but in a different way. Kyle is, well, the golden child. He's my uncle's son. Grew up in a big house, private school, tennis lessons, all of it. Grandpa helped raise him too, but more as the family's free babysitter than a bonding thing. Kyle lives about 4 states away now. Marketing job, engagement photos every 5 minutes, that kind of vibe. He wasn't at Grandpa's bedside, didn't make it to the funeral due to a conference or something, but that's not really what this post is about. Growing up, Kyle and I never really got along well. He always seemed to get the best of everything, nicer clothes, newer phones, more praise from the adults. We were constantly being compared. He got straight A's. I got decent grades and told to focus harder next time. He won a local essay contest once and brought it up at every family gathering for the next year. The kind of rivalry that wasn't outright hostile, but never really went away either. In Grandpa's will, Kyle did get something. Some old military pins and a rifle he used to keep locked away. It wasn't a slight. Grandpa split things up the way he wanted to. The watch just happened to go to me. About a month after everything was settled, Kyle called me out of nowhere. He said he heard from my uncle that Grandpa had left me the watch. He said he was kind of surprised, and then asked, pretty politely at first, if I'd be willing to give it to him. Said it had always been a family piece, and he'd really like to keep it in the bloodline. I reminded him that I was literally part of the same family. He laughed it off, said he didn't mean it like that, and asked me to think about it. I said no. Not in a rude way, but just plainly. I told him Grandpa gave it to me. It meant something to me. It was the one thing I had from him, and I wasn't planning on letting it go. He sounded disappointed, but said he understood and hung up. That was the end of it. Or so I thought. Fast forward 6 months. My car breaks down. Like catastrophic failure. Transmission failure. Electrical issues. Brakes already bad. The mechanic looked sorry, even giving me the quote. I'd already missed several shifts because I couldn't commute. Rent was coming up. Groceries were getting scarce. My credit cards were maxed, and I had no one to call for help. I sat in my apartment looking at the watch on my dresser. I hadn't worn it once. It needed servicing I couldn't afford, and every time I looked at it, it just made me sad. And in that moment, it hit me. Grandpa gave it to me. Me. Not because it was fancy, but because it was useful, practical, and right then, the practical thing was to sell it. I took it to a vintage watch dealer in the city. They offered $4,300 on the spot. I took it. The money got me through the worst of it. Fixed my car, caught up on rent, bought actual groceries. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Then Kyle found out. He called again, furious this time, said I had no right to sell his grandfather's watch, that I knew he wanted it, that I should have called him first and offered to sell it to him. I told him it wasn't his to buy, and I didn't have the luxury of time. I was trying to stay afloat, not play auctions. I needed help, and the watch gave it. He said it wasn't about the money, it was about what it meant. To me, it meant survival, getting to work, not having to choose between gas and lunch. He didn't care, said I should have sucked it up and figured something else out. That it wasn't about the money. I disrespected Grandpa's memory, used the gift as fast cash. He brought up every time Grandpa had helped me growing up, like I was dishonoring him by letting it go. Said he would have bought it from me if I just asked. And yeah, I could have asked. I'm not going to pretend the thought didn't cross my mind. But at the time, I was barely sleeping, rationing gas, living off instant noodles, and praying I wouldn't get laid off. I didn't want to go crawling to someone who already acted like the watch was his to begin with. I made a call. Maybe not the perfect one, but it got me through. I didn't throw a party after selling it. I didn't feel triumphant or proud. If anything, I just felt tired. Still do sometimes. I'll think about that watch and feel a twist in my chest, but I don't regret it. Not really. I needed help, and no one was offering it. That watch helped me in a way that no one else was willing to. Now, Kyle isn't speaking to me. My uncle called and said I should have handled things better, that Kyle is just emotional and I need to cut him some slack. A few other relatives have chimed in too, calling me selfish, short-sighted, saying I acted out of spite. I didn't. I was overwhelmed, trying to keep my head above water, and the only person who used to help me figure things out wasn't there anymore. So yeah, I sold a family heirloom because I had to. Am I the jerk? You're the jerk. Look, I get that times were tough and you needed the money, but the fact is, you knew Kyle wanted the watch. All you had to do was pick up the phone and ask if he'd buy it before selling it off to a stranger. If he refused or lowballed you, fine, sell it. But you didn't give him that chance. That's what makes it feel shady. You made the decision for everyone, not just yourself. Not the jerk. You were backed into a corner, and that watch wasn't Kyle's to begin with. Your grandfather gave it to you. Not because it was shiny and valuable, but because it was something you'd use. Kyle had the chance to be there when it mattered. He wasn't. He got his share in the will. You don't owe him anything. Could you have handled it differently? Maybe. But surviving shouldn't make you the villain.
Hey, Reddit boy, what would you do if your cousin sold Grandpa's watch for car repairs?
I'd probably understand. I mean, cars don't really run on memories.
Fair enough. But if cars did run on memories, I'd fuel mine with guilt and passive-aggressive Christmas cards.
That's all for now, but don't be blue. We'll be back soon with more stories for you. Remember to listen to Mr. Redder every night, so your dreams will be wonderful like you are and bright. Now click this playlist, come follow along. We'll be right here. Until then, so long.